support refugee claimants here in this province, saying that the arrival of refugee claimants was a mess, in the words of the Premier's spokesperson, 100% the fault of the federal government, and so the federal government should pay 100% to help house those refugees. What was the reaction of the Prime Minister? We'll find out. Justin Trudeau is next on Metro Morning. 19 degrees right now. High today of 25. 26 tomorrow under sunny skies. 29 on Sunday. The humidity is gone, but the sun remains. Here's Jennifer.
Good morning. Southbound 404 and Don Valley Parkway fill in after Elgin Mills through Major Mackenzie. Look out for a disabled truck blocking the right-hand lane at Steeles, and then you're filling in as you approach Shepherd through Lawrence. Westbound QEW as you approach Cawthra, we have a collision blocking the two left-hand lanes. Several emergency vehicles are on the scene, and it's completely jammed from the 427. And northbound 427 Express is congested from Dundas with a collision on the ramp to board the westbound 401. Good morning, Julia.
Good morning, Jennifer. Crews are working away again this morning at the Leaside property connected to alleged serial killer Bruce MacArthur. Police say they found more human remains near that property yesterday. Our Nick Boisvert is there on scene. We'll have a live update from him coming up at 8:30. And as you heard, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is here yesterday. He did meet with Premier Ford. Among the topics discussed was a potential carbon tax on this province. Mike Crawley, our Queen's Park reporter, will have more on that at 8:30.
Thank you very much. 12 minutes after 8 on CBC Radio 1. They say that opposites attract, and I think it's fair to say that sparks flew when Canada's Prime Minister and Ontario's new Premier met yesterday at Queen's Park. From cap and trade to tariffs, the pair has a lot to discuss, particularly when it comes to the rapid increase in refugee claimants coming into Canada. Just before Justin Trudeau arrived at Queen's Park, Premier Doug Ford's office put out a statement accusing the federal government of causing a housing crisis by encouraging illegal border crossers, and that, and this is a quotation, the mess was 100% the result of the federal government. Ford's government has withdrawn its support for the resettlement of asylum seekers. We did request an interview with the Premier, Doug Ford, and with Lisa MacLeod, the provincial minister responsible for immigration. Neither was available, but Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was, and he is with me in studio. Prime Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
Has your government been encouraging people to cross the border into Canada illegally?
No. We've actually been reaching out to communities in the southern United States, including in Africa, to highlight that coming across the border irregularly is not a shortcut into our immigration system. You will be assessed as an asylum seeker, as a refugee, and if you're not indeed fleeing persecution and war, but you're just looking for a better life for yourselves and your family, you will unfortunately be sent home to your country once we've gone through the proper process. The Premier asked me a question that a lot of people have asked me, that in a lot of senses, why don't we just stop them at the border? Why don't we just prevent them from crossing? And the answer is actually linked to both our international obligations, but also our charter and due process. We have to provide due process for people according with Canadian law and values.
At the beginning of last year, you wrote on Twitter, "To those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength," and then the hashtag welcome to Canada. What was the effect of that tweet, if not to encourage people to come to Canada?
Oh, it was to highlight that we have a refugee system that recognizes when people are fleeing persecution, terror, war, where people cannot be protected by their home country. We, like multiple countries around the world, have an obligation to welcome them. It doesn't refer to economic migrants. It doesn't refer to people who are saying, oh, you know what, I'm worried about my status here in this country. I'm going to give a shot into the United States.
And you don't believe that it encouraged people to come here, that it put out a welcome mat?
I think the work that we've done actually explaining that our immigration system is strong and rigorous. I mean, has been effective. And one of the things that we need to remember and recall and cherish as a country is we are one of the few places in the world where immigration is broadly supported, not just by the population, but by all political parties. And that's something very, very precious to hang on to.
Do you believe that Doug Ford understands Canada's obligation to those who are seeking refugee status?
I think I highlighted to him that, and you know.
Do you think he understands what our role is, though?
The Premier has expressed to me directly that he understands how immigration is important to our country. I just think the one thing that we've seen is, unfortunately, conservative politicians here and around the world world are playing a very dangerous game with something that shouldn't be fodder for division. Canadians are supportive of immigration and accepting refugees. They need to be reassured, as they can be, that we have a system in place that is going through all the processes. Anyone who crosses our border, including irregularly, gets processed to the full extent of our system, and our system applies to them. When you're playing up divisions and fear, you're playing a very dangerous short-term game.
Do you think that this could lead to a rise in anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-refugee sentiment that we hear, in Toronto, the mayor saying, if we don't get funds from the federal government, we're going to have to close a community centre. Do you worry that could lead to an anti-refugee sentiment?
That's why we've been working with the City of Toronto. That's why we've been working with the province, understanding how important it is to give them the resources to be able to handle this.
But do you think that if the resources don't come, that there could be what you were just hinting at, the worry that could bubble up to the surface?
I have tremendous confidence in Canadians, and the resources will and are flowing. We understand the responsibility that the federal government has with this, and that's why we're working with the province and with the city. Now, the Premier has indicated that perhaps he'd prefer us to work directly with the cities and not send the money through the provinces. I think it's better when we work with the province, but these are discussions that we're going to be having with the Premier, officials to officials, over the coming weeks.
You also discussed the issue of cap and trade. The first bit of business Premier Ford did was cancel the cap and trade program here. What did you tell him about that?
I simply said that I understood that he has a mandate, but I have a mandate as well to move forward on a national plan to fight climate change and protect our environment for future generations, and that's what I'm going to do. We've created a national plan that will have its impact right across the country. Ideally, we work with the provinces. If the provinces don't want to, then we move forward on a plan that will include, of course, returning any revenues to Ontarians in this case.
Politically, can you afford to impose a carbon tax a year out from an election in a province that voted with a majority government to remove the province from cap and trade?
I'm sorry, Matt, but this is one of those things where it's not about politically. I don't think we can afford not to move forward on fighting climate change. And the Conservatives will disagree right across the country. They're not thinking we should take action on climate change. I disagree. I don't think we can afford, regardless of what it might cost politically, I don't think we can not show the kind of leadership we need to do on fighting climate change.
He's only been in office for a week today. He's already said that cap and trade is done, that the onus for paying for the shelter for asylum seekers is with Ottawa. Can you work with this Premier?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those are the two issues where, yes, we have very clear, and people knew this going in, differences of opinion and approach. But on NAFTA, on recognizing that we have way too many guns in our streets in Toronto, and needing to move forward on that and working together in protecting our citizens, we're moving forward. We're willing to move forward on that, and we talked about that. We also talked about growing our economy and helping entrepreneurs and small businesses. There's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be able to work on, and that's exactly what Canadians expect.
What can the federal government do to stop the flow of guns into the city?
Well, first of all, recognizing that the flow of guns used to be predominantly crossing the border from the United States. Now we're hearing from police that a lot of those guns are actually were legally purchased in Canada or legally in Canada and end up in the hands of criminals. So there's one of the things we move forward with is common sense gun legislation that's actually going to make it harder to get guns, make it easier to keep guns off the streets. And we hope that we're going to get broad support from that from everyone, including Conservatives.
Just finally, while you were speaking at Queen's Park, you addressed an issue that has been swirling around for the last month. And these are allegations that resurfaced that you groped a female reporter at a charity event 18 years ago. Yesterday, you said that you didn't feel like you'd acted inappropriately in any way, but you said it was important to recognize the woman might have felt differently about the interaction. Both the publisher and the editor of the paper where she worked described a brief, unwanted touch. You've been thinking about this. What do you remember about that encounter?
I remember that the encounter happened. I do not remember any inappropriate actions. And this isn't just me trying to think back 18 years. This is, in the following months when the editorial came out, I sort of, and even in the moment of where she recalls me being apologetic, I did not know to what she was referring. I do not feel that there was any inappropriate action of any type. But, and this is the really important thing, it is not just my experience that matters in this. The way, and this is the lesson we're all having, the way the same interaction could be experienced by different people is a really important thing to get our minds around and reflect on. And that's exactly what we need to be doing as a society, and that's what I need to be doing.
If you don't believe that anything inappropriate happened, why did you apologize?
Because, and that's a great question, because it's one that I've been reflecting on as well. If I apologized, it was because I saw that she had been made uncomfortable, and I did not want her to be uncomfortable, regardless of whether I knew why she was uncomfortable or not.
If you had a few minutes to talk with her, what would you say to her now?
I wouldn't say anything. I'd listen. I'd listen to try and understand what her perspective, what her experience was, and reflect on how I could have done differently. Even though I don't think I did anything wrong, that's not the whole story anymore.
What have you learned through this month in that experience? And you talked about reflecting yesterday. You talked about looking back. What have you learned through that?
Well, I learned that, and this is something that I've learned through my whole life. My first volunteer experience was with the Sexual Assault Center at McGill, where we did a lot of talking around communications and consent and assault and all these issues. And the one thing that I've seen very clearly is, even for people who feel like they have a grasp on this, there's always more to reflect on, always more to learn. And this transformation of our society for the better needs to involve every single one of us being reflective about our actions and about how they can be experienced by others.
Prime Minister, thank you.
That's a pleasure, Matt.
Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister of Canada. We did request an interview with the Premier, Doug Ford, and Lisa MacLeod, the Progressive Conservative Minister responsible for immigration. Neither were available to speak with us this morning. It's 22 minutes after 8. Something completely different coming up next. Joe Carter. We're going to talk about that home run, which happened 25 years ago this year. I'll tell you more about that coming up. First, Jennifer.
Well, in the last half hour, we had quite a few collisions spring up. Most have been removed, but you're still dealing with a fender bender on northbound 427. It's reducing the access ramp to the westbound 401, blocking the left-hand lane. And because of that, northbound 427 is completely solid through Dundas Express. Westbound Gardner is working well until you approach the 427, and then it's congested due to an earlier collision